Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Just Another Esports podcast. Once again, joined by me, your host, Nicholas Shady Bacon, and my co host, Mr. Kevin Hubers. This past weekend, we kicked off the first week of Stage 3 matches. We had some upsets here and there. It's exciting as it kind of always is. And so we'll be delving into kind of a recap of those matches that we saw Thursday through Sunday. And then we'll be diving in to our predictions for the second week of Stage 3 that is coming up this Thursday. So, kind of to start off the weekend, we did have the Paris Legion facing off against the Dallas Empire. Paris had two matches this weekend, the first one being Dallas on Thursday, and their second one being up against the LA Guerrillas on Saturday. Up against the Dallas Empire, they lost 3-1, and then they got 3-0'd later into the week on Saturday up against the Guerrillas. And so, kind of the talking point here, I guess, for Paris is that their woes continue even outside of this roster change of taking Fire out, bringing Temp in. Obviously, they only had a week, or I think they were one that they announced the roster change pretty early, so they probably had a bit more than a week. They had around 2 weeks time to kind of prepare going into, or at least to scrim, because the matches weren't announced until a bit closer to the date, but they at least had a decent amount of time to get some repetitions in with Temp on their lineup. However, it has not yet kind of fostered any success. And so, is this kind of like at the point in the season where we saw last season where Paris, they're just not like we expect them to just be a bottom of the barrel team and they're kind of doomed at this point?
Paris is fucked. They're I don't know how to say it any other way. They're fucked. It's done. Season's over. Pack your bags, go home. Um they're not making playoffs this year. This is the Cleveland Browns of the CDL. I'm just
The
saying it right
Browns are
now.
doing a bit better
Oh, no,
in
no, no,
recent
no.
time.
Okay, so in recent times, yes. All right, I guess for the Zoomers not paying attention, um, to football in the past like 10 years, the Browns have historically been awful, terrible. Um, I think this is Paris. That being said, this isn't like tanking or anything. There's no draft. It's just they're bad. They're really, really bad, and they have the same colors. So that's all I wanted to get out of this. Like, did you watch that Search and Destroy?
I mean, I watched all the matches, not incredibly closely,
They
but
let
I did
Crim
watch them.
6 go 10 and 0.
Yes, that was it was expressed though, at least Crypsix has some history with that one.
Yeah, sure, I don't disagree with
But
that.
the thing too is that the matches, pretty much every map, it wasn't even close. They didn't really have any kind of positive outlier this weekend in their matches. Even like they did have a blowout on Garrison up against the Dallas Empire. Even kind of after that map was reset, they won that 250 to 111. So that was a really good win. And so looking at that first hard point that they played of the entire weekend, you're like, okay, maybe this roster change they'll be halfway decent. But after that, they go 0-5 in map count, and they just lose everything, and it's not even close. They lost both the following hard points by 100 points. The S&Ds were a 0-6 and a 2-6. And then you kind of look over at control, and they lost that 3-1 and 3-2 up against the Grills. But that it was a raid control, and the slaying differential, it was not even close for that one. I mean, they got outslayed by 10 kills in that control, so it's not looking good for Parrots, and they don't really have kind of any positive mode in their map set. I think I can't there was some outside of Garrison Hardpoint. Garrison Hardpoint has been their one ray of hope, which they're 7-1 on that. But outside of that,
Yeah, but yeah, like I mean, we could even talk about LAG right now and their matchup with Paris because I mean, it
yeah.
was the same story. It's just Paris or sorry, not Paris. LAG is not as good as the Dallas Empire, and I think anybody will agree with that. It was nice to see LAG's new roster getting a good win, though. I think we
Yeah.
both anticipated that, right?
Actually, we both thought that Paris was actually going to beat the LA Gorillas.
Now, did we
Um,
talk about the the LAG roster changes in our last podcast. I think they happened at a weird time.
Yes. We knew that Vivid was getting subbed out
Right.
because I remember I said, like, everyone was freaking out, but like, oh my gosh, they're taking out their best player. However, when you look at the stats, and this is a roster change where there was like a glaring issue in the stats sheet that you could look at, one it being engagements per 10 minutes, where Vivid is astronomically far ahead of everyone in the league at like 54 engagements per 10 minutes. And then the rest of his team is around average at 44 to 45 engagements per 10 minutes. So he's a whole 10 engagements per 10 minutes above everyone else on his team, which causes a massive disconnect in their teamwork, you have to imagine. And so while everyone was freaking out, like, oh my gosh, all this pressure that Vivid does, he's so good for his team, he's a detriment.
Right.
If like they're playing that disconnected and disjointed at the for that, like the pacing of that. And so they bring in Chino. We didn't know who they were going to bring in. They did end up bringing in Chino. And so Silly moved down to the SMG role, which is what he actually played during World War II alongside Apathy in that World Championship that they did win together. And so they already kind of have some synergy built up through there. They're bringing in a kind of methodical AR player. I don't want to say he's similar to Aches because we haven't seen Aches in a long time. If you were to kind of, and I can't remember exactly how he played during World War II, if they were that similar or not. But I mean, Chino's a smart player and he's a solid player and he was really good during World War II. And
Oh yeah. I mean,
bringing him into this roster, while it's obvious, it's very interesting. I'm glad to see kind of that success at least early on for this roster, since there were so many people kind of doubting the change.
if what they're trying to do is replicate EG's run in World War II champs, then they're getting pretty close, honestly. And we we got the whole apathies benched and mentals in now, right? Or is that not yet confirmed?
Um, I have not heard of this. People are saying Apathy is going to be hitting the bench and Mental is going to be coming in.
Yeah, they're thinking mental's going to be in.
Is this a kind of a rumor
I,
floating
I
around?
saw it on Twitter. I don't know if it was official. It definitely wasn't announced by any of the teams, but I think that mental might be coming in for apathy here pretty soon,
I
which
would
would be pretty good.
be I would be relatively surprised if that happened, since they just kind of moved Silly down to that. I feel like they wouldn't make that roster change at least this early on into like one that they literally just made a roster change like last week. And
Right.
so I think they'll wait a little bit to kind of see how this shapes up with now having Silly and Apathy paired up as an SMG duo. Since, I mean, you kind of look at the results over the course of this weekend, Apathy definitely had a much better performance than he has had in kind of the weeks past. And so Apathy has been a relatively inconsistent player though during this season, so we'll have to see. We'll have to keep an eye on him to see if he can keep that up over the course of the coming weeks. But I would be very surprised if they sub him out already.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. It's we'll see. We'll see. We like just take a look at the Hook thing for example. You know, what happened there? So, um, it's it's hard to tell. Speaking of, you want to get into the Dallas Empire?
Proved Florida Mutineers, and this first showing from the Florida Mutineers was not a good one. Toronto swept the floor with them. However, Toronto has kind of been sweeping the floor with. They swept the floor with both teams they played this weekend, both matches. The one against Florida and then the one against the Dallas Empire. Both were 3-0s in favor of the Toronto Ultra. And so they have not skipped a beat coming off of their win at the Stage 2 Major. And one of the like in the month of April, Toronto Ultra have been 10-1 in control, which is an insane statistic. They've gotten so many reps there in that mode, especially on raid. by far they played that the most. But one thing that's kind of interesting, I guess, parallel is Florida had that month of dominance last year in the CDL. I think it was around
Yeah.
April. And so is that something we're going to be seeing with Toronto where they kind of hit stride for a month, little maybe like a month and a half or two, and then they start to fall off drastically as we saw with Florida last season?
Yeah, I will say that there was also another team that kind of hit a big old regain button, especially whenever we switched to online. It wasn't in April, but it was around that time. Um, Dallas Empire were not a, I don't think they were a top five team in the beginning of the season in my eyes, and they turned it around and won champs. So, it while yes, it could be something like the Florida Mutineers. I mean, it very well could be that. I mean, Toronto's just kind of the real deal right now. You know, they might have built a wonder squad. You know, they might have just got the right guys at the right time. Vibes are probably immaculate right now. They look like they're having a good time, and I mean, it shows. I mean, you don't 3-0 Dallas but without like some absolute insanity. So I think that Toronto is doing something special, and we'll see if it's a Florida thing or if it's a Dallas thing. You know, coming throughout the season, but right now it's been fun to watch. That's for sure.
Yeah, so I want to touch on kind of Dallas since Florida does have another matchup that we can discuss. But Dallas, this was their only match of the week, or no, they played Paris. My bad, they played Paris on Thursday, but uh, they didn't have that roster change on Thursday. So they won on Thursday with Hook, and then on Sunday, or I guess literally like the day after or that night on Friday or Thursday night or something along those lines, they say Hook's going to be benched and we're bringing in Fellow. And this was the one roster change. I think this is probably the only roster change throughout the course of of this season so far that I can't think of a reason for. Like, there's no argument that I can make, at least by looking at the stats that we have, to defend it. I know Crimsick said look at the mini map and it will tell you kind of why we're taking Hook out to bring in someone else. Um, but like I I don't want to be too critical of it. Like, it was, they only had like what, two days to kind of practice, and they're going up against Toronto, who literally just won the stage 2 major and still has been looking on form from that. And they were able to play them relatively close in at least the hard point. Like, the control was a bit close. The S&D not so much. That was on Miami, which I think is one of Toronto's better S&D maps. But it's still just such a weird roster change. I want to get your thoughts on it, kind of when it was announced.
Um, so whenever I thought about it, I was like, Hook is in MVP form. Um, and they're gonna say that his performance is what's been lacking right now. I I don't know. I look at Illy and Shotzi and I wonder, you know, how they're pulling their weight. I look at Krim and I wonder, you know, what's going on up there. Um, and I don't know. I don't even think you make a roster change if you're a Dallas Empire. And if you do, it's not most certainly not your best player. Like objectively, you know, with beyond a shadow of a doubt, your best player. You know, we could say that like, you know, Vivid was like way off on engagements. No, like Hook was winning them games by not by himself, but I mean, he's Hook the Nuke for a reason. You know, kids electric.
Yeah, I mean, looking at their respawns, he's the only player positive in hardpoint, so that's going to be kind of a huge hit to them in that game mode. Um, yeah, it's just a very weird change, especially when it's not something kind of performance wise. It feels like it's something that need to talk like, hey, we can't have you running around over here. We need you in this position. It feels like it's just something that they can communicate to him, or maybe they've been like the only reason I could think that they stuck through with this change was they've been telling him like, hey, we need you to do this. And it's kind of a habit that he's gotten into, I guess, over kind of the course of the season so far. And it's a little bit more complicated for him to kind of break it. But I do not see this change being a long-term change. If anything, kind of like what I hope comes out of this is they're like, okay, we have this brand new player coming in, fellow, who doesn't have any habits. So we're going to kind of mold him into what we want. Well, fellow's not even playing the same role as Hook. So I guess that argument doesn't even make sense. Like, what I was going to say was we have fellow kind of play the role that we want Hook to do. Hook watches him. And so then he can kind of gain experience that way. That's something I know is somewhat common in like League of Legends, at least in like jungling. And so I was thinking maybe they're doing something kind of along those lines where they have a player play the role that they want the someone to eventually slot in and do. But doesn't hold up because they're playing like fellows playing the flex and they moved Illy to the SMG. So honestly, I feel like I just don't understand this change.
It doesn't make any
Hopefully
sense.
we
It doesn't make any
see,
sense at all.
yeah, hopefully we see some improvement or something out of the Dallas Empire. But as of right now, it's looking like the first L of kind of roster changes since all the other ones that have come about. I feel like you could very easily make an argument that it's ended up improving the roster, at least if not over the long term, at least over the short term. But that was it for kind of the Dallas Empire and for Toronto. Toronto's obviously still performing really well. But Florida, so in their first matchup against Toronto, it was Toronto. They did get 3-0'd. But then going up against another team that, I mean, they were Minnesota. They played Minnesota on Saturday. Minnesota ended top 4 in the major. They definitely weren't a team to take lightly. But Florida kind of made relatively quick work of the Minnesota Rocker in their Saturday matchup. They beat them 3-1 in the end. And we kind of saw more of what we were expecting, I think, from this Florida lineup with Havoc coming in to be the SMG duo to Neptune. And Awakening and Skies obviously had major performances, but I think we have to ask the question if Florida is still inconsistent, if we're actually going to really see any improvements out of this roster change, because you might see a slight improvement from them, but it still seems like that inconsistency might be there. And honestly, if Awakening and Skies aren't having massive games, it doesn't seem like Florida is really ever going to be able to consistently beat the kind of teams that make up like the top 6.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Florida is kind of destined to have flashes of brilliance throughout the season. Um, they have the upset potential to beat big teams. They lose to teams that they generally shouldn't lose to if they're winning against teams like Minnesota. Now, the Toronto thing, that makes sense, right? Florida is, you know, Florida's kind of, not necessarily in a rut, but they're trying out Havoc. Toronto's playing their best COD. Um, 0-3 is not what you're looking at, but I mean, against a hot team like this, it's very hard to beat. That being said, they come in, they prove themselves on Saturday against Minnesota, who's also a very hot, streaky team, Standy being a huge reason for that. And you start to scratch your head and think, well, maybe this does work. It's hard to tell at this point. What I will say is that they pose the biggest threat as an upset team, and they could make the major interesting in the sense that they could beat somebody that they probably shouldn't.
Yeah. That's kind of like what I'm feeling with this Florida roster as well. It's you kind of roll the dice to see if they're going to have a big game with Awakening and Skies. And if they do, then they can probably beat almost any team in the game. Right now, though, that inconsistency, it's gotten them to, I believe they're in ninth, or they're in either the ninth or the eighth spot in the league, and only top 8 are making champs. I have confidence that even on a bad day, they can beat the Ravens in Paris. However, you're looking at kind of the other teams down there at the bottom of the barrel in the Seattle Surge. And then I know I'm forgetting one, LAG as well. Minnesota's up there in the 7th place spot, but you're kind of looking at those teams. Those are all the teams that are fighting to not get to not be bottom 4. They need to be top 8 in order to make champs, and there's a disparity growing between the upper echelon teams and kind of the teams that are on the cusp of not making champs. And so, will this roster change help Florida? Like, Florida needs to be able to make it to champs. Then they're just hoping that they kind of catch fire and that they win the whole thing. It kind of feels like that's what they're going for, at least right now. It'll be interesting to see if they can get some sort of consistency. Obviously, with the match against Toronto, you can't really say they should have won that. So I think this upcoming week and the following week will really kind of tell us where we can kind of put this new rejuvenated Florida Mutineers lineup with Havoc coming in. But that's it for Florida. And so we'll move on to Friday, where we saw the likes of the Seattle Surge up against the LA Thieves. So LA Thieves are also a bit of an interesting team,
For sure.
so to say, because they have gone to quite a few. They've reverse swept 2 teams quite recently. One was London, and then the other was Seattle in this matchup. The LA Thieves ended up winning 3-2 over the Seattle Surge in the end. If they don't win those 2, you're looking at this LA Thieves roster very differently from how we kind of have since stage 2. As a result of their reverse sweep over the London Royal Ravens in stage 2, everyone's like, oh, Kylo Ken, oh man, this LA Thieves roster is looking great. If they don't win that matchup against London, they end bottom 4 there. And then they come in here and they possibly lose to Seattle, who was, I think they only made top 6. And
Right.
so you're not looking at this LA Thieves lineup as positively as you might be right now. And so I'm very cautious with what my opinion is of this LA Thieves roster because they've been so close to losing so many times. And that's kind of like what it was an issue with Dallas. Dallas has played so many game 5s. They played an astronomical number of SNDs. They played almost as many SNDs as hard points. And that is telling that they could have a much worse record than they currently do if they weren't able to clutch up in all those game 5s, in all of those round 11s. We could be looking at a Dallas Empire that's bottom 6 in the CDL if it wasn't for all those clutches coming in for them. And so I think we could say a similar story with this LA Thieves lineup. If they weren't able to clutch up against the Royal Ravens, they weren't able to clutch up against the Seattle Surge this past weekend, then we're looking at them quite differently than we are now.
Yeah, of course. But almost only counts on horseshoes and hand grenades, Nick. So the fact that they did win means that the Thieves are kind of legit. I mean, if they had lost, you'd be like questioning, all right, well maybe Slasher wasn't the right call, maybe Temp wasn't the right call. Well, who do we put the blame on now? Maybe it's coaching staff, maybe it's TJ, maybe it's Kenny. Like, we'd be looking around. I'm not looking around for who's doing anything wrong whenever they're still winning. And if it's a reverse sweep, what that tells me is that, I mean, they hit the big fat regain button and played the maps that they were good at in the back half. So that shows a lot of determination and grit to reverse sweep twice. And I mean, I got to give it to him. Honestly, I'm not gonna sit here beat around the bush like, oh well, they could have lost both those games. Well, they didn't. They did win. They're coming out really hot right now, and they could be a serious threat going into the Stage 3 major. I really like this LA Thieves team right now, and it's a team with TJ Halley on it, and I'm saying that. So
Yeah. Well, this wasn't the only matchup for the Thieves this weekend. They did end up playing a rematch up against the London Royal Ravens. And this time around, they did beat them much more comfortably. It was a 3-1 over the Ravens. And Ravens, they came in with a new roster change. They brought in Zaptius for Dylan. Obviously, this is a very recent change. However, currently it does not seem like an improvement. I was honestly somewhat skeptical if it would end up being an improvement simply because you are swapping synergies. You're taking away the Dylan Z synergy and adding a Zappius Paul X synergy. So it seemed kind of there wasn't really much of a change. It was very linear. It didn't seem like it went up. It didn't seem like it went down. It seemed like it just stayed flatlined. And right now, London definitely needs a change that's in the upward direction. Hopefully, one that's an upward parabolic, parabolic, whatever. Something they need a very sharp, drastic change upward because right now they're last place in the league, and I do not see them making champs. End of story.
you don't see them making champs?
No.
Hmm.
There are two teams that I can give pretty much 100% guarantee they will not make champs. One of them being London, the other being Paris. I
Yep.
can almost give 100% with 100% certainty that those two teams are not making champs. And so it's more so who are going to be the other two teams that don't make champs because you look at all the other teams and those teams have at least had some flashes of brilliance in recent times. You look at Seattle Surge, some of the improvements there. Pristini's finally coming to his role as a Slayer. They seem to be playing together, playing much better together. You look at the Florida Millionaires, they've obviously been really consistent, but they have incredible upset potential up against the top teams in the league. You look at the Minnesota Rocker, what they've been able to do with Standy coming in. They just got top 4 at the last major. And then you look at the LA Gorillas. They did only play one matchup up against the Paris Legion, but they crushed them. It was not even close. And
Right.
so it's going to be really interesting to see which of those four which of those which of those 4 teams is able to uh, come out on top since only 2 of those are going to be able to make it to champs and the other 2 are going to have to sit at home crying along with the Paris Legion and the London Royal Ravens.
Well, I mean, if we're gonna guess right now, I could guess, but there's like you said, the rest of the teams are in the soup, and it's really unclear right now who the best team right now is, and I'm sure we'll get to that here in a little bit. Um,
Yeah.
but we
I
could talk
did
about Optic.
well, okay, yeah. Well, Seattle's other matchup
Oh,
after their
fair,
loss to the Thieves, it was up against Optic. They lost at 3-0. That was a bit of a blowout. Me and you thought that was going to be a bit of a closer matchup since they've
true.
at least they've taken at least a map off of the Optic gaming roster, at least in their prior matchups. However, this time around, Optic kind of really showed up to play, and my notes for Surge were based on their LA Thieves matchup. There were once again drastic misplays by Octane in the S&D. Um, and just kind of a complete collapse. And that's kind of the second time we've seen the Seattle Surge roster kind of unravel at the seams and end up being reverse sweep. I think that's probably the second reverse sweep that's happened against them in recent times. And there's still been kind of some relatively poor plays from them in Search and Destroy. You think back to when they got reverse swept by Minnesota Rocker uh, just a week before the stage 2 major. where, I mean, accuracy was on the other side of a car. He ran by it. Octane got up, looked around, didn't see him, went back prone, and then got shot. And then you kind of look at this one again. I can't remember. I don't think it was around 11. And I can't remember if the S&D was too close. I'm just going to bring it up right now to really quick. It was a relatively close S&D on rate. It was 6-4. So the round definitely did matter. But I just remember they had bombed down. I believe it was at the A bomb site, so at Ring. It was planted, so LA Thieves needed to defuse it. It was a 1v1 situation. Octane had eyes on the player. There was only like 17 seconds or so on the bomb. Octane's in like kitchen. He sees the player go courtyard, takes like some pot shots at him, backs off, and then he stays there in the kitchen, not moving at all, just stays there and waits for the player to re-challenge him. And to me, that's just such an ego play that's like so boneheaded that he doesn't need to do. Because at that point, he can just walk away, do a full loop all the way around to check the bomb, like just from laundry. Like he just leaves kitchen, goes all the way around back through his spawn. And like the amount of time that it takes to do that route, the player's not going to be able to move from the courtyard onto the bomb to defuse it quick enough. And so at that point, time's at such a small amount that the player isn't going to be able to get the kill and the defuse unless Octane really screws up. So just some weird egotistical plays that keep on occurring in S&D that I'm starting to pick on. And I know Nameless continuously is mentioning them. And I know Joe DeLuca is also kind of pointing them out, that there's just some really sloppy S&D play coming out of these teams. And that was one that I noticed,
Yeah, well,
at least in that Seattle Surge matchup.
I mean, the Surge definitely played some solid Surge this entire weekend. I mean, the Thieves, they played them tight. They took them to round 10 both times. They won the Moscow, they lost the raid, and then they lost the Moscow against Optic, and it was a 6-4. So every time they took them to round 10, their Surge has gotten dramatically better
Yeah,
than
from what it was last season, and I don't know if there's been improvement over the course of the season, but it's definitely, it has been abysmal. It's just these small moments where it seems to like break apart for them. Where if it didn't break apart at those certain moments, they might get the map win, and who knows where it can go from there. Uh, so, and that's something that those small mistakes are things that will keep them from getting into the top 8
right.
to make it to champs.
Yeah, so we'll see.
Yeah, it's definitely, we're only at like kind of right around the halfway point, I guess, of the season. I think after this weekend, we can kind of quote unquote call it the halfway point, since there are 5
True.
majors,
True.
5 stages, 5 majors leading up to champs at
Well, I guess then
kind of the end of the year.
after stage 3, you could officially call, like, you could stick a fork in it and say we're halfway done, right? Because
Yeah,
because
a
you
little
would
more than halfway done.
consider champs in itself to be almost a stage in itself, just because of like the gravity of it. I mean, that's
Yeah, but
champs,
only 8 teams make it. That's why I'm kind of considering it slightly different.
right? But I mean, there's going to be a ton of COD played.
Oh yeah, there's going to be a lot. But that was kind of rounding out Seattle Surge. Optic, they looked good. They looked solid in their victory over the Seattle Surge. Obviously, it was a 3-0, so you can't really say that they didn't look solid. It was relatively close, I do think, though. If I want to go back and look at the hard point, I want to say the hard point was pretty close. Yeah, the hard point was really close, 250 to 240. Optic actually got out slayed on that hard point and won it, so that's very positive for
Yeah,
them.
that's true.
That very rarely happens with Optic gaming rosters. They won the S&D, obviously. That was a 6-4. And then they had a relatively comfortable checkmate control. And I actually got fooled when watching control this weekend because I forgot that it was tick based and not kill based. So I was like, wait, why are they on offense? They had way more kills than the other team, but that tick based change has been quite interesting to see over the course of the first week of stage 3. But moving on to, I guess, the last matchup that we have not yet discussed, it was the big upset of the weekend, the New York Subliners up against the Atlanta FaZe. And New York was able to take the victory here over the Atlanta FaZe in 3-2 fashion. Me going with the coin on this one, getting the dub. The risky play for me paid off there. Hydra's debut, kind of what did you think from him and this New York Subliners roster? Obviously, I made a mistake in what I said the roster was going to be. I thought it was going to be Diamond Con staying in. It was Mac, however. So the New York Subliners rosters Clayster, Asim, Hydra, and Mac. But what were your thoughts, Kevin, on this New York Subliners roster?
Well, I mean, they only beat FaZe, so it seems pretty okay.
Yeah, they only beat FaZe, but now there's a couple teams that have beaten FaZe so far this year.
Right.
Toronto's beaten FaZe, New York has beaten FaZe, and LAG's beaten FaZe.
I will
So those
say
those are three teams.
that New York has been sitting, or has been, they've had Hydra on the bench for this entire time. Well, I mean, visas aside, um, I think that Hydra is gonna turn around the subliners. Um, I couldn't imagine what this team would have looked like if it was Zuma, Clayster, Hydra. I don't know, maybe Mac Melts.
I feel
Um,
like I would rather have Asim and Zuma, to be honest.
well, for this specific team, yes. That being said, Hydra is an absolute animal, and he just wowed everybody. He came in and he just like laid it all on the table and said, "All right, this is what I got," and he couldn't have picked a better team to do it to.
Yeah,
Um, it's not like we had to like watch the subliners against Paris or London or something like that, and we were like, "Oh, they 3-0'd. Well, what does that mean?" No,
yeah,
this
their group is stacked too because you look at the this group. You got Optic, you got Atlanta, and then obviously you have New York. Who else is in this group? I'm gonna bring it up real quick because I honestly can't remember. But yeah, can continue on.
yeah. So I was thoroughly impressed with it, even though it was a 3-2 and Atlanta played them tight. That's their job, right? That's what Atlanta's supposed to be doing. They're supposed to, you know, make sure that they're keeping games tight against top teams. And New York coming out on top is, I mean, that's gotta feel really good for them. And do you think that this puts any doubt into FaZe as an org, whatever they're losing against Toronto? They don't take home the second major. They they're starting to lose against other teams like Minnesota and New York. And then you still have to like worry about Dallas and Optic even. And maybe Florida might get you every now and then. This is
Yeah,
starting to be kind of interesting if you're FaZe, where maybe a couple weeks ago we might have been like, yeah, FaZe is looking pretty unbeatable right now. FaZe is looking pretty beatable right now. So
yeah.
it's definitely flipped the script quite dramatically in this stage three.
Yeah, I have here in my notes. Well, although the title of the last podcast was "Gods Bleed, but Do They Die?" Uh, well, I would say yes. Fate, they're not dead, but they are no longer God tier. They're no longer that S plus plus team.
Yeah, they are in an
Uh,
echelon of their own.
yeah, they have fallen from grace. They're there's a great like lore reference here from League of Legends that I wanted to bring up. That's super nerdy, but I can't remember it, so I won't. But they have fallen from grace. They're now among the mortals here, in kind of the death battle that is the CDL,
Yeah, the
and
war zone.
they still do have like a decent sized lead up against the Dallas Empire. I believe Atlanta FaZe are at like 225 or something. Dallas Empire's at like 190, and
Right,
then
but
right
it's
behind them
still
Chicago. But there's still
early.
a lot of yeah. It's still early on. We're still only in stage 3, so we still have a little bit more than kind of half of the season to go, and it's looking like the other teams have kind of caught up to FaZe. I mean, you look at Ultra, you look at Optic, you look at Dallas, New York now. All these teams have the potential to beat Atlanta FaZe, where prior to kind of stage 2 and prior to the matchup this weekend up against New York, you would not that would be like half, or there wouldn't be any teams like in that conversation. And so it's very going to be very interesting to see where Atlanta FaZe round out this group, since like it's very top heavy. You have London and you have Seattle in that group, but then you have LA Thieves, you have Optic Chicago, and then you had the New York Subhunters, who they lost to, and both LA Thieves and Optic Chicago are currently 2-0. I believe they both played London and Surge, however, so it'll be quite interesting to see what happens after this next week, since those standings are bound to change. But losing here to the New York Subliners, this group's going to get quite interesting quite quickly.
Yeah, yeah. This stage 3 is the best thing that's ever happened to competitive COD. I mean, at first, if it was just gonna be Atlanta FaZe running over everybody, it would have been a very boring season, if I'm being honest. But now things are spicy. There's like 6 teams that are all really, really good. And then you've
Well,
got
we dropped Atlanta FaZe down into the soup. We added a little
yeah, exactly. But
cayenne, a little paprika. It's a spicy soup now. It's a curry. The soup has become a curry.
so yeah, so we got this curry, and then so some people are like, like the the bits of vegetables or like the meat or something like that, like the good part of the curry, and then some people are like still like the soup, like the broth. You're like, this is okay. Like this is fun to like, dip your bread in or eat with rice or what have you. But uh, there's like so there's 6 teams that are vying for one of the top places. You have 4 teams who are battling it out for those last 2 playoff spots, and then you have London and Paris who are just they aren't on the table. They aren't part of the curry. They're like the water that you
The
get.
dealer's no longer dealing them a hand.
Right,
They
they're out.
retired early.
Yeah, they're out. I mean, like I'm pretty confident to say that like there's no salvageable hope for either of those teams. So yeah, so there you have it. 6 teams that will most certainly make the playoffs. You have 4 teams that are going to be battling for those last 2 spots, and it's going to be a bloodbath for the next few months. And then London and Paris, who should probably just give up their CDL rights. I'm, I mean, London, I would love to keep around, but Paris, hand it over, hand over the keys, give it to a city that actually will care about it.
Yeah, the interesting thing too is with this battle, Minnesota has a relatively sizable lead up against the 8th place team, which is currently Gorillas. So Minnesota Rocker, they're at 110 points right now. The Gorillas are at 80. Then you have Florida at 70, Seattle at 50, Paris at 50, and then London Royal Ravens at 30. LA Thieves are at 130, and then Toronto Ultras at 145. So it, Minnesota's battling with the kind of top 6 to make it there. Who's battling? Why did I say Minnesota was battling? It's kind of more of, yeah. Someone needs Minnesota just needs to not lose to Florida, Seattle, or Gorillas, and they should be fine to make it in. Pretty.
Yeah, but
I
I
think.
mean,
Wait,
who
what
who
am I
knows
looking at?
who
I'm
knows
so
what's gonna.
confused right now.
Yeah, so
Minnesota is pretty much a lock-in. I think the only teams battling, there's one slot realistically, and the Gorillas, Florida, Seattle, Paris, and London are battling for it.
well, let's
I
just not waste
guess
time
that's what I'm
on
looking at. I
playoffs
think I
midway
miscounted
through.
earlier or something.
So
I
let's
don't know.
not waste our precious
Yeah,
time
we'll
talking
we'll
about
we'll move
playoffs
on.
midway through the season.
We'll move on to our predictions. But I do want to recap. So the coin in its first week of predictions, it went 50-50.
No shot.
It went 50-50. Yeah, it did. It It got the Paris versus Dallas matchup incorrect. I'm not going to go through all this, but it went 50-50 at the end of its first week. Unfortunately, Kevin, you also went 50-50. So you gotta step up your game
yeah, I know.
this
I'm
weekend. You
battling
gotta
a
do
coin.
better than the coin. That's the benchmark. I actually had a relatively good weekend. I went 7 for 10. I got the
About
Dallas
time.
one, Dallas versus Toronto one wrong. Yeah, about time. I got the Florida versus Minnesota one wrong, but we both got that one wrong, and then we both got the Paris LAG one incorrect. So realistically, looking back on it, I think we should have went the other way with the LAG one, potentially, but hindsight's
Hindsight's 2020, as they always say.
hindsight's 2020.
All right,
So we'll
so
just move on. Hold on,
we
I
want
gotta
to
bring
you
up
want to
the
do the
coin app.
yeah. I was about to say bring up the coin flip real quick, and I'll start filling in my predictions.
You can't go with the coin flip though, because the coin flip
Oh
it
yeah,
went
yeah, true.
50-50. You don't want to abide by it.
Oh no, just flip the coin, flip the damn
Okay.
thing, and whatever it says, it says.
All right.
I'm not gonna let it
What are
bias
we
me.
looking at here? We got London versus New York. So London will be heads, New York will be tails. So the coin's going with London over New
Coin's
York. So
blasted.
coin's yeah, I don't know what the coin's been drinking, but I'm gonna have to agree with you. I'm gonna say New York. For some
Yeah,
reason, I feel like we're gonna see a better looking London and maybe a little worse looking New York, simply because this isn't like a super hype matchup. However, I could be incredibly wrong with that. New York could just blow London kind of out of the water. Either way, though, I don't realistically see New York losing to this London Royal Ravens lineup. So yeah, I'm gonna agree with you. I'm gonna go a little bit spicier. I'm gonna say 3-2 New York. You're saying 3-1. Either way, we're agreeing there. Next matchup, we got Atlanta versus the LA Thieves. So LA Thieves are gonna be heads. Atlanta's gonna be tails. Coin's going with Atlanta. Safe bet. Safe bet here.
good coin.
Maybe not as safe a bet though in recent times.
True.
You've been pretty high on this LA Thieves lineup. I they shouldn't beat. There's realistically no way they should beat Atlanta. However, that doubt is starting to kind of linger now with the losses that Atlanta has taken in recent times. But yeah, I'm gonna say it should be a 3-1 for Atlanta. Moving on to our Friday matchup, it's LAG versus the Toronto Ultra. Coin flip here. Coin flip's going with Toronto again. It's gonna be hard to beat the coin this week. I'm thinking that early London prediction by the coin, I think, is gonna save us in the end. But yeah, I'm gonna agree. Toronto, they should beat LAG. Uh,
Oh, for sure.
LAG might be a team that could give Toronto. Actually, no, I don't think they'll give Toronto trouble.
LAG
They
will
might
not
have
be a
given
team.
old Toronto trouble.
LAG will not be a team until champs. I think I like the narrative that they're going for this EG route where they sucked all year, they barely made playoffs, and then they won champs. But we'll see.
We'll, we'll have to see if they can make some of that magic work. Okay, moving on
Definitely
to
Magic.
Friday, the second Friday matchup. It is the Minnesota Rocker versus the Paris Legion. Yeah, I think we're both really low on Paris in agreeing that Minnesota should take this. The AR matchup between Accuracy and Aqua might be a little bit interesting, since Aqua's actually had a really good season so far. But coin's getting spicy here. Coin's going with Paris. But yeah, me and you are going to agree,
Blasted.
3-0 Minnesota over Paris Legion. Next up, we've had some pretty easy predictions, I think, so
Right.
far this weekend. So something's bound to hit the fan.
Yup.
Yeah, there's either we already have one of these easy predictions wrong, and like shit
No, we're
just went
about to get
crazy,
hosed.
and like Toronto get 3-0'd by LAG or something. But Saturday matchup, Atlanta versus London. I'm agreeing with you. It should be an easy W for Atlanta. We'll see what the coin is thinking. Is it going to give it to Atlanta? It's giving it to Atlanta.
I was about to say.
Coins got some solid picks, I think, this weekend. But moving on to the Saturday matchup, you actually have this one being really close. You're saying Dallas versus LAG is going to be a 3-2 in the end with Dallas taking it. Do you want to explain that? Because I think that's a bit of an interesting choice there.
Yeah, so I think that Dallas is going to struggle with Philo being added to the roster. Don't get me wrong, he's a great player, he's a beast. Um, they're gonna struggle in the search, and they might struggle in the control or one of the hard points. So it's just LAG is starting to feel themselves, and you have Dallas who made a major roster change for a guy who this isn't like his rookie entrance into the league. Like Philo has been playing like
Fellow?
fellow, sorry, but yeah, sorry, fellow. Um, Fellow's been playing in the league since CWL days. Like, I mean, he's not an OG, not like Clay or Krim, but he's been around for a while, and so I don't think that it's gonna be like a weird honeymoon or like a star power. I think that Krim knows what he's gonna get from Fellow, and Illy and Shotzi are kind of just along for the ride.
Yeah, yeah. Fellow, I've always liked Fellow. I think he's a solid player. The one thing I've always have noticed when watching him play is he can go on very hot streaks and then kind of in the same matchup just get cold instantly. And also he is very poor at using his score streaks when he does earn them, which is relatively frequently if we're looking kind of at Black Ops 4 era. You got quite a few streaks, and the usage from them was quite terrible. But
Yeah, well, I mean, at the end of the day, even just having a streak on that map means that you can buy yourself a couple extra seconds on a hard point, or you can clear them off of a hill and control, or something to that effect. It's not the end of the world. Yeah, maybe in search, a streak wasted feels a little bad, but in respawns, it is what it is. If you don't hit anybody, then it's kind of COD timing.
yeah, yeah. So looking at kind of the this matchup, I think I'm gonna agree with you that it goes to game five simply because they don't really have too many shared maps that they prefer. They actually differ quite drastically in the maps that
Right.
they like. I don't see if this goes to a raid control, I could see the Gorillas winning it, simply because that is their best control map. They're like 0-5 on Garrison, and Dallas is really good at checkmate control. So I would have to imagine Dallas ban raid. If they don't, they could very easily lose this series up against the Girls. But the coin is going with Gorillas. I will not. I will agree with you that Dallas should take it. But I'm going to actually agree with you now that I look at it a bit more closely with that 3-2. Moving on to Saturday, we got Seattle Surge. Well, we've been in Saturday. Last match of Saturday, we got Seattle Surge versus the New York Subliners. You're saying Game 5, NYS takes it over Seattle Surge. Yeah, this could be a close one too. I do think I'm gonna say New York takes it. I think they'll take it 3-1. I did say it was gonna be close. New York, I think they'll like Seattle's one poor game mode has been their control. They've been really bad at control. New York had a really bad showing this past weekend on control. They are above and beyond the best offensive team in control. They're the only team, they were the only team with a positive win to loss ratio for offensive rounds, meaning they've won more offensive rounds than they have lost. That statement went down to a 50%. They're actually 50% overall on offensive and defensive rounds now after this past weekend in control, funnily enough. Um, but I imagine that they'll kind of get back and improve on their offensive rounds since that was something that I know Clay was disappointed in after their series up against the Atlanta FaZe since they did lose 3 of them. The coin, it's going to go with New York in this matchup. So coin's got some pretty solid picks this
Yeah, I
week.
know. I think who said it? JCap said a coin could pick it right. Was it JCap?
I mean, last weekend the coin didn't. Coin went 50-50.
But I went fifty
So,
fifty, so I mean, I don't know, maybe onto something. That's all I'm saying. And the coin's picking the subliners against Seattle. They're picking, Atlanta
the
against the
coin could get
Thieves.
all three Sunday matchups wrong, though. We don't know that yet. Or we could just have gotten everything. This is an interesting one. This is why you might lose to the coin. You're going Paris over Florida. Paris 3-1 over the Florida Mutineers. You're thinking Florida's about to shit the bed in this matchup.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Okay.
This is
Just checking.
completely on brand for Florida to mess
It
up.
is. It is, but dude,
This is this is the match that you lose. This is like the all right, cool. Like, we've thought the predictions have been pretty straightforward so far. All right, Paris, Donnie Temp can figure out how to play against Caesar Skies or something like that, and all of a sudden it's all over, and it looks like an absolute mess, and we're wondering if Havoc is the right move and all this other stuff, and it's just this is a typical Florida match where they go in, we think that they should win this, no problem, and then they get BTFO'd by Paris.
yeah. Uh, one argument I guess for that is you look at their map pool. Florida, they're 1-7 on checkmate. Paris, they're 3-3. Garrison, Florida's 5-5. Paris is 7-1. So either you ban your worst map or you let Paris's best map get through. So I'm already banking on Florida losing at least one hard point. Then you kind of look to the other maps. They're both 0-1 on Apocalypse, so I don't imagine that gets picked. Florida, they're 4-0 on Raid. Paris, they're 2-4. They're 0-2 on Paris is 0-2 on Moscow, and Florida is 2-1 on Moscow. So I think Florida will likely win the hard point that they get to pick. However, it's not guaranteed, since it. I'm imagining Raid is probably going to get banned, and so they'll be forced to pick Moscow. I would imagine. I'm thinking that's what's going to happen. So I'm predicting it's going to be like a Garrison Moscow hard point, and Paris is going to get the map they're 7-1 on, and Florida gets the map that they're 2-1 on. So unless Florida just goes checkmate up against Paris, which
Who knows?
they could do. But moving into search, I probably take Florida in the search. That's probably what happens. I take Florida in both of the S&Ds, kind of looking at Paris. Paris
True.
is above and beyond the worst S&D team in the league at a 6-13 map record. Florida is pretty average. They're 10-10. My bad. There's one team worse than Paris at S&D, and that's London. They're 5-15. Good lord, that's really bad. But then Control, they're both pretty average at Control. So yeah, I think it's going to come down to those S&Ds, and in the S&Ds, from what I'm seeing, I probably favor Florida. Now, Florida, obviously, they've been inconsistent. They could choke up against Paris. I'm going to put a little bit of faith in this roster change, though, with Havoc coming in. I think they're going to be a bit better at S&D. And so I'm gonna go Florida in the end 3-2. The coin is going Florida as well, just so you know.
Coins blasted. I don't know. Honestly, it could go either way. This is just my hot take.
Yeah. Next next one. All right, you got what the hell? You really wanted to. Did you drink something between when we were doing our Saturday picks and when we're doing our Sunday picks? Because
Nope.
these Sunday picks you got are some spicy stuff.
I I'm taking Minnesota.
All right, you
And
got Minnesota 3-2 over Toronto, and you got LA Thieves 3-2 over Optic Chicago.
yeah.
All right, I'm going to need you to elaborate.
All right, so I think that Minnesota is definitely looking to repeat some of their successes earlier in the second stage major, where they were playing really well And I think that they're going to take the motivation from the London home series last week and take it to almost a heart and really come back and pull something off against Toronto. Um, this is really the only match that they have to truly focus on this week. And I think that Toronto is also going to be worried about LAG more than, well, they're going to be worried about both. But something just tells me that Minnesota has this chance to do it. And whenever accuracy pulled that three piece off of Optic, and they'd all just lined up for him. I mean, sometimes it do be like that, and it sucks, but it is what it is, and that's COD. Minnesota, a lot of the times, whenever they get wins, they're just right place, right time, and that's just clutch factor at that point. That's what you have to define it as. So whenever you talk about clutch in a battle of two really solid teams, being Toronto and Minnesota, I think that you're going to see some sparks fly in the Battle of the North.
Yeah, this is the Battle of the North. Jeez, this is what I've seen this matchup quite a lot this season. I think this is the fourth time we're going to be seeing Toronto versus the Minnesota Rocker. However, looking at Minnesota's kind of recent performances, they're on a losing trend. In Hardpoint, in Search, they've lost quite a lot in recent times, a lot more than they've won. They had a bit of a streak in Hardpoints when they first made that roster move. Um, However, since then, it's kind of been a bit of a downward trend. The only thing that's been on the up and up for them has been their control. Where since the roster move, they've been 5 for 2 in that mode. So all directions for me are pointing that this should be a Toronto win. The coin is actually going to agree with you though this time around. It's saying Minnesota. So we will have to see, but I'm going to say Toronto takes this over Minnesota. Moving on to our last Sunday matchup, it's LA Thieves versus Optic Chicago. And this is another one where I just cannot see kind of the team that's expected to win losing to their opposition. I am still relatively skeptical on the LA Thieves. Yes, they have shown us clutch factor. However, they've been clutching up teams that they really should not be finding themselves in those situations to begin with. And so I think if Optic goes up 2-0, given the 3 remaining maps, I don't see Optic getting reverse swept in that situation
Most
where
likely not.
a team like London or Seattle could. So
But
I'm going to say
oh, go
Chicago
ahead.
takes this.
Yeah, and I mean that's a fair statement. I think that either of these teams could win. So it's not like you saying Optic right here is blasted. Um, I think that you know if the thieves are gonna show up against Optic one time, it could be this weekend. They've got a lot to play for. They're on a hot streak right now.
They got a lot to play for. If they beat Optic, they're
They're the
looking
first
like
place
they
team.
could. Yeah,
They're the first place team in the on in their division or what have you, if they beat Optic, and if they get first in stage three major,
that's a lot of points.
I mean, all of a sudden the Thieves are in a discussion again, and they're not one of those teams just vying for a spot in the playoffs. They become, one of the playoff teams. So it I mean, this major is important. Every single major is important. Don't get me
Yeah.
wrong, but this
If
major
they are able to
says a lot.
top if they are able to top this group, they move outside of the realm of a team being on kind of the fringe. Even though they're not really on the fringe, they're more in the fairway. But the, they move on from that conversation to into the kind of the contention for the title conversation. I think if they are able to come out and top this group, since I mean you just had New York take down Atlanta. You still have Atlanta in the group who they face off against, And then you still got kind of the sleeping giants that are Optic Chicago. So it'd be quite the feat to top this group.
Yeah, we'll just see. We'll see.
But I think the coin went with Optic in the end there. Coin's a bit of a fanboy.
Greenwall fan.
Yeah.
Coin. Gosh. Got a coin
But
saying when does Optic play?
that I mean I'm using the Google coin flip, so it might just be going with whatever the most frequent search is, which when does Optic play? I feel like that's up there up there in the Google
Jeez.
searches. But that's going to be it from us. Let's see if we're able to topple the coin this week. But I think that's going to close out the episode. I hope you guys have a fantastic weekend filled with some action packed Call of Duty. But that's going to be it from us. And we will see you guys next time.
Later.